China became the world's factory through a mix of historical, economic, and political factors. Here's a structured overview of how it happened. 1. Historical foundations. Economic reforms, 1978 onward. Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up policy shifted China from a planned economy toward market-driven growth. Special economic zones, SEZs, like Shenzhen, attracted foreign capital and technology. Focus on exports. China prioritized export-oriented growth, encouraging global firms to set up manufacturing operations to take advantage of cheap labor and favorable policies. 1. Cost advantages. Low labor costs. For decades, China had a vast supply of rural workers migrating to cities, keeping wages low. Infrastructure investment. China built world-class ports, roads, rail, and power grids, reducing logistics costs. Economies of scale. Once industries were established, massive production volumes made China even more cost competitive. 1. Government support. Subsidies and incentives. The government provided tax breaks, land grants, and subsidies for export industries. Currency policies. China often kept its currency undervalued, especially in the 1990s, 2000s, making exports cheaper. Industrial policy. Strategic investment in manufacturing hubs for electronics, textiles, steel, and later advanced industries. 1. Integration into global supply chains. WTO accession, 2001. Joining the World Trade Organization opened global markets to Chinese exports. Partnership with multinationals. Global firms outsourced production to China due to its scale, reliability, and supply chain networks. Cluster effects. Manufacturing cities like Dongguan for electronics, Yiwu for small commodities, became hyper-specialized ecosystems. 1. Technological catch-up. Technology transfer. Foreign companies setting up factories in China brought technology and know-how, often under joint venture rules. Local innovation. Over time, Chinese firms moved from low-end assembly to higher-value products, smartphones, electric vehicles, solar panels. 1. Scale and market size. Massive domestic market. Companies could serve both export demand and China's growing middle class. Network effects. Suppliers, assemblers, and logistics providers clustered, making China the most efficient place for global production. 1. Global implications. By the 2000s, China was producing a huge share of the world's textiles, electronics, toys, and later advanced products. Today, China is shifting toward higher-tech manufacturing, chips, EVs, renewable energy, while some lower-end production moves to Southeast Asia and South Asia. Great question. Comparing China with India and other developing nations really highlights why China succeeded as the global manufacturing hub. Here's the breakdown. 1. Speed and scale of reforms. China, rapid top-down reforms starting in 1978, creation of special economic zones, SEZs, for example Shenzhen, gave foreign investors tax breaks, cheap land, and less red tape. India, liberalization came much later, 1991, and reforms were slower, with more bureaucracy and political fragmentation. SEZs and infrastructure support never matched China's scale. 1. Infrastructure development. China, massive government investment in highways, rail, ports, and power. Today, China has the world's largest high-speed rail network and some of the busiest ports, Shanghai, Shenzhen. India, infrastructure development lagged. Ports are congested, electricity supply has historically been unreliable, and logistics costs remain high. 1. Labor force utilization. China mobilized hundreds of millions of rural workers into cities. Labor laws were flexible, enabling very low manufacturing costs for decades. India, large workforce too, but barriers like stronger labor unions, restrictive labor laws, and slower urbanization limited scalability. 1. Government coordination. China, authoritarian system enabled long-term planning and execution, for example, Made in China 2025. Policies were coordinated across central, provincial, and local governments. India and others, democratic systems slowed decision-making. Policy changes were often inconsistent due to frequent political shifts and state-center frictions. 1. Integration with global supply chains. China, WTO accession in 2001 opened global markets to Chinese exports. India, focused more on services, IT, BPO, software, rather than manufacturing. Manufacturing FDI was smaller and often faced bureaucratic hurdles. 1. Business environment. China, one-stop shop support in SEZs, fewer procedural delays, and a government eager to help exporters. India and others, bureaucracy, corruption, and red tape discouraged many investors. Permits, land acquisition, and compliance remained cumbersome. 1. Domestic market advantage. China, huge population plus rising middle class, attractive not just for exports but also for domestic consumption. India, large market too, but slower income growth and more fragmented demand reduced the immediate incentive for large-scale manufacturing hubs. 1. Technology transfer and innovation. China enforced joint ventures with foreign firms, which facilitated technology transfer, ESP in electronics, automotive and later renewable energy. India allowed 100% foreign ownership earlier, which often meant less technology sharing and fewer local spillover effects. 1. Focus areas. China, manufacturing-centric growth. Textiles, toys, electronics, now EVs, solar, semiconductors. India, service-centric growth. IT outsourcing, software exports. India leapfrogged into a digital economy but never built large-scale factories at China's level. 1. Other developing nations, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Mexico. Vietnam and Bangladesh, strong in textiles and low-end manufacturing but limited scale compared to China. Mexico, close to the US and strong in auto maquiladoras, but lacks China's massive labor pool and state-driven infrastructure buildup. China's advantage? Combined cheap labor plus huge scale plus infrastructure plus policy support in a way no one else matched. In short, China's unique mix of early reforms, massive infrastructure, huge labor supply, state coordination, and integration into global trade gave it a head start that India and others couldn't match. India leaned into services instead of manufacturing, while smaller nations couldn't achieve China's scale. Perfect. Let's look at how the world's factory story is evolving today with the rise of the China Plus One strategy. 1. Rising costs in China. Labor costs. Wages in China have risen significantly. A factory worker in China now earns several times more than one in India, Vietnam, or Bangladesh. Environmental regulations, stricter rules have increased compliance costs for manufacturers. Geopolitical pressures, trade tensions with the US, tariffs, restrictions on tech, and supply chain shocks, COVID-19 shipping disruptions, pushed companies to diversify. 1. China Plus One strategy. Multinationals aren't leaving China entirely, but they're adding at least one alternative base. Why? To reduce risk from overdependence on one country and to take advantage of cheaper labor elsewhere. Examples. Apple still manufactures most iPhones in China, but is expanding assembly in India and Vietnam. Nike and Adidas moving some production to Vietnam, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. Electronics firms diversifying into Mexico to serve the US market faster. 1. New rising players. India, strengths, large labor force, government incentives, PLI schemes, and a fast-growing domestic market. Weaknesses. Infrastructure and bureaucracy still challenges but improving. Trend. Gaining smartphone assembly and electronics manufacturing, Apple, Samsung. Vietnam, strengths, pro-business policies, good infrastructure for its size, strong trade deals, CPTPP, EVFTA. Weaknesses, much smaller labor pool compared to China. Trend, electronics hub, a big beneficiary of US-China tensions. Bangladesh, strengths, very low-cost labor, global textile and garment hub. Weaknesses, over-reliance on one sector, limited diversification. Mexico, strengths, proximity to US, USMCA trade deal, strong auto sector. Weaknesses, security issues, governance challenges. 1. China's response, moving up the value chain, shifting from low-cost goods, toys, clothes, to high-tech industries, EVs, solar panels, robotics, semiconductors, investing heavily in automation and AI-driven factories. Domestic market focus, leveraging its massive consumer base to reduce export dependency. Belt and Road Initiative, strengthening global trade routes and influence. 1. The future landscape. China will remain central. Its supply chains, infrastructure, and scale can't be replicated overnight. But diversification is real. Southeast Asia, India, and Mexico are all picking up niches. Endgame. Instead of one world's factory, we may see a multi-hub global manufacturing system. China at the high-tech center, with India/Vietnam/Bangladesh/Mexico specializing in lower cost or regional production.